Watch your step, because sometimes one small misstep can erase everything in an instant. Across America, hidden behind the walls of giant industrial complexes, are furnaces hotter than volcanoes. Places where molten iron flows like rivers of fire. At the Caterpillar Mapleton Foundry in Illinois, the heart of that inferno burns at nearly 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Hotter than molten lava and hot enough to reduce human flesh to ash in seconds. This is no ordinary workplace. For the men and women on the foundry floor, every movement is a matter of survival. There are no second chances, no redo button, just heat, steel, and the constant reminder that the floor beneath them could become a grave at any moment. On June 2nd, inside this unforgiving environment, a man was living his fifth day at his brand new job. Just 39 years old, he came in carrying all the hope of starting fresh, learning the ropes, maybe even building a long career at this place. But little did he know, the very floor he was walking on would betray him in the cruelest way possible. That morning, his task seemed simple. Retrieve a sample of molten iron for testing, a routine job countless workers had done before. He spun down a massive wheel, tilting a vat that poured out glowing streams of iron, liquid fire cascading like the Earth's core set loose. And as the sparks hissed and the air trembled with unbearable heat, he leaned forward, closer, closer, so close that even witnesses later gasped. It should have been just another careful moment in a dangerous place, but in foundries, careful is never enough. The tiniest misstep can transform an ordinary shift into a nightmare no one will ever forget. What happened next would turn an ordinary workday into something burned forever into the memories of his colleagues. With his sample of molten iron in hand, the man turned back toward his manager. For a fleeting moment, it looked like everything had gone smoothly. He had leaned dangerously close to that roaring cauldron of liquid fire, but he had done it. He had pulled off the task. It should have been the kind of small win that boosted a new worker's confidence, yet fate had other plans. As he stepped away from the vat, the metal deck beneath his boots betrayed him. In a split second, his balance faltered. His foot slid on the unforgiving steel, and he pitched backward. Time seemed to slow as coworkers shouted warnings that came too late. Half his body plunged into the molten abyss while the other half flailed desperately above the surface. He tried to push himself out, but it was useless. The heat was overwhelming, the pull unstoppable. Within moments, he was consumed by the inferno, swallowed whole by fire hot enough to erase bone itself. Witnesses would later describe the scene as something no human mind should have to process. One moment he was there, solid and alive, and the next he was gone, devoured by a glowing orange sea that showed no mercy. The silence that followed was not relief, but shock. Because on that foundry floor, death hadn't just happened. It had erupted, sudden and absolute. And in that instant, every worker knew the line between doing your job and losing your life was as thin as a slip of the boot. This was no accident to shrug off. This was a warning, etched in fire, that would raise questions impossible to ignore. The aftermath was chaos wrapped in silence. Alarms blared, but no one truly moved at first. His colleagues stood frozen, their eyes locked on the glowing vat that had just devoured their teammate. Emergency crews rushed in, but everyone knew the truth. There was no rescue to attempt. Half of his body had disappeared into the molten iron, while what remained lay on the steel deck, a grim reminder of how unforgiving the foundry could be. For the coroner, there was no mystery to solve, just the unbearable task of retrieving what little could be recovered. The company immediately shut down operations. Managers huddled together, workers were ushered away, and an investigation was launched. But whispers were already spreading across the floor. How could this have happened on his fifth day? Why had a man with so little experience been placed so close to one of the deadliest areas of the plant? It wasn't just about a slip. It was about a system that seemed to treat survival as an afterthought. And the haunting part? This wasn't the first time. Just a year earlier, at this very same plant, another worker had fallen to a similar fate. The details were eerily alike. A moment's mistake, a body swallowed, and lives left shattered in the aftermath. For veteran employees, the memory of that earlier tragedy was still raw. Now, seeing it unfold again, some described it as déjà vu in the worst possible way. The foundry was forced to confront the brutal truth. It wasn't enough to say accidents happen. This was a pattern, a deadly one. Regulators stepped in, unions raised their voices, and families demanded answers. Because in a place where even a single misstep could mean death, the question wasn't just about what happened. It was about why workers were being left so vulnerable in the first place. In factories like Mapleton, safety manuals are thick, posters line the walls, and training sessions drill the same message over and over. Caution saves lives. Yet on the foundry floor, workers whisper a harder truth. Sometimes safety feels like theory, while survival is the only practice. When you're standing above rivers of molten metal or inches away from machines designed to crush steel, every breath feels like a gamble. And when tragedies repeat, like the back-to-back deaths at Caterpillar's foundry, people can't help but wonder, is the system broken or is danger simply the price of the job? The United States has long grappled with this reality. Since the Industrial Revolution, the backbone of the economy has been built on men and women laboring in conditions most of us can barely imagine. From the deadly Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911, to the countless mine collapses that pepper history, to modern oil refinery explosions, every era carries its own cautionary tales. Each time, regulations tightened, promises were made, but accidents kept happening. Experts point to a grim equation. In high-risk industries, the tiniest lapse compounds into catastrophe. A wet boot, a jammed switch, a loose cable, all can transform a routine shift into a headline. And too often, it's not just about the worker's mistake, but about the company's culture. Were they rushed, undertrained, pressured to meet quotas? Because in environments where danger hums beneath every step, even a moment of distraction isn't a flaw, it's a death sentence. For Mapleton, the debate boiled down to this. Should a fifth-day worker have been anywhere near that molten vat? Safety wasn't just paperwork, it was a moral line. And once again, that line had been crossed. The tragedy made clear that in factories like these, the difference between a guideline and a lifeline is razor thin. Hundreds of miles away from Mapleton, in the pine-scented air of East Texas, another factory tragedy unfolded. One that would be etched into sawmill lore forever. At the Whitworth sawmill, the hum of machines was constant, a rhythm of grinding, slicing, and churning that turned massive pine logs into neat stacks of lumber. It was the kind of sound workers tuned out after years on the job. But on one particular afternoon, that rhythm broke. A wood chip machine had jammed, halting production. For the men assigned to clear it, this wasn't unusual. Jams happened, and when they did, the quickest fix often relied not on manuals, but on muscle and improvisation. They brought out a heavy steel cable, thick enough to tow a truck, and wound it around the machine's stubborn gears. 4 men pulled, adjusted, and strained, their faces glistening with sweat as they fought to free the blockage. Another man joined in, lending his weight to the struggle. But steel doesn't forgive, and cables under pressure are like coiled serpents, waiting. The men tugged, twisted, and stretched the line until it bowed outward, taut as a drawn bowstring. For a moment, it looked like the jam might give. Then, in an instant, the nightmare struck. The cable snapped. The sound was like a gunshot, the release of energy as fast as a bullet and as brutal as a guillotine. In the blink of an eye, it lashed across the work area with deadly precision. 4 of the men were hit full force, decapitated instantly where they stood. Helmets flew, bodies stayed upright for a split second before collapsing in silence. The 5th man, by sheer chance, was hurled aside. His leg was shattered in multiple places, but his life was spared. One moment, they were struggling with a stubborn machine. Next, the floor was a scene of indescribable horror.